In this lesson, we are going to work on, instead of you working on the front, the best next thing to do actually is to work on what I call the midplane. And that'll actually make creating the front and inner or outer and inner surfaces a lot easier because we'll have a more of a midplane type of reference. So here in front view, this is a set of curves that we got from, rather not from 18, but rather from layer 17 in our before and after, where we decided that this is a more appropriate shape for what we're trying to achieve. So I've just copied those layers, or rather those curves, down to the revised front curves layer as a guide. And so what we can do now is I just draw out what I call long curves. And so those are, here's the first one. Usually what I do is just take a curve and I just try to trace things out from two views at the same time. And to help me do that, I'm going to use my front curves from the 17 layer and also use the initial fit model at the same time. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to just type CC space, and it doesn't really matter where you start drawing this. I mean, it matters that you start at the bridge, but it doesn't matter how accurate you are as you go around, because you're going to move all these points a bunch of times later. So we're just trying to get in the ballpark. So you just start at the bridge and hold down Shift to go straight over, and you can actually hit F3 on your keyboard to turn off your object snap, because you're just going to be snapping to everything by accident. So you can come in and just trace out a curve, like something like this. And that's about as much as I can do from the front view because I can't really see anything else. So if I scroll up and turn on my fit model, I have just the frame sitting here. And again, I'm not really very close to it, but I just need to get in the ballpark. And with that turned on, if you type RR space to go to the right view, now all of a sudden you're looking at the right. And so I'm just going to type, or rather click a couple points there and then continue on so I can adjust that later. Just clicking out a few points like this. And that and this very strange looking curve is what you end up with. And here's really the original one that I did. And so I just copy pasted that and set its layer color, or its display color rather, to green. And I began trying to get it as close as I could, although not especially close, because again, I'm going to move these things all later, but I at least started to turn the points on and drag them from being over here, kind of nowhere near the frame, to at least being in the general vicinity of the frame. And I do that now so I don't have to do that bit later. And this is a lot of sort of guesswork over here, but and that's why I really do tend to prefer to leave on the fit model, just so I have some landmark in space of approximately where these curves might need to go. So if you're this close with the curve drawing, as you know, to the fit model, that's perfectly fine, because what we're going to do next is just extrude that curve straight up. So if we pick that curve and come down to the C layer and just pick the curve, type XC space, and just extrude it up. It doesn't really matter how far. I usually go, maybe looks like 18 to 20 millimeters or so, like that, and just click. Now you have this surface. And the reason I do this is a lot of people like to try to draw out like a wireframe of curves, and I think that is a good strategy, but when I'm doing eyewear, I find that the more I can see and the more I can, it helps me. If I can see surfaces starting to crash into each other, I can see that something either has started to twist or maybe should start to twist, then that's more valuable to me than trying to guess between basically the top and bottom edge of this and kind of guessing what's happening in between, even though in this case it's a straight line. So once I've extruded it up like this, that's pretty much all I do for the moment, and then I'll copy that to a new layer and start really moving it around. And the way that I do that usually is, let me make this layer a color we can see, like red, for example. And what I'm doing here is I'm kind of looking at the middle of everything. So I basically just turn on all these points from the extruded surface here. Oops, that one. And they've all ended up in these different various positions. And the way I do that is very manual and pretty straightforward. But to demonstrate, let me go to the right view, for example, and I would just pick these points. Usually I'm just really roughly kind of dragging them into place kind of as fast as I can, because at some point I'm going to start nudging them around, because that feels like a finer level of control that I like to have once I have things generally in the right area. So, I'd come in and nudge those guys up, pick some of these points here, nudge those up where I think they more or less are going to need to be, kick some of these back here, that kind of thing. And when you have stuff like this, where you have a surface that wants to make kind of like a turn or a knuckle or something like that, but then up above it doesn't, usually what you have to do is just kind of space the points out. Something more or less like that. And it doesn't really disturb anything later on in the process. So that seems to be the best approach for when you've got to do something like this and you want to use a natural edge of the surface versus having a much larger surface here and then just using a curve to trim it out. So when it comes to eyewear, a lot of I definitely use a combination of trim surfaces or trimmed edges and natural edges, but whenever I can, I try to use a natural edge just because it tends to create a lighter surface that's a lot, or at least more easy to manipulate. So again, it's these points are, for example, over here are way off, but again, it's pretty easy to just pick them, drag them up, kind of in the vicinity, something like that. Kind of get them all where they need to go. And this takes a little bit of time and a little bit of practice, but it's actually not so bad, and it actually becomes kind of relaxing after a while, because you're not really having to figure too much out. You're kind of just matching what's already there, kind of thing. And so let me shade this. And yeah, you can see a lot of this stuff is way, way off. And sometimes the gumball using G space will make a lot of this go a little bit faster. Turn all the points off and turn these back on. Going in and out of wireframe mode's a big deal when you can't see stuff, of course. And yeah, it's a lot of manual point moving at first and eventually, but it's a highly sculptural product, and so despite many people's best efforts, there's no automatic way to create it. You kind of have to sculpt it by hand. So basically, let me hide the fit model really quickly. If I hide that, I've ended up with something that is this red surface, which is, if I hide unselected, you can see is pretty clean as far as the reflections coming across it. It's pretty calm. There's a little bit of a ripple under. If you go into ghost, or rather rendered viewport, you can see there's a little bit of a ripple in here. But again, this is yet another baseline guide for us to model from. And so once you get something that seems like it's at least smooth, you don't have any more of this kind of wobbliness or jaggedness going on, and it starts to feel pretty smooth. And again, it's really helpful to kind of see what the right answer is in this case. If you haven't done this before, you can see I've just sort of smoothly spaced these points out pretty evenly for the most part. If I go into hide unselected and turn on the points and then go into the wireframe viewport, I tend to do a lot of this where I'm just looking at the points as they kind of like I'm going down a roller coaster kind of thing, and I can see like this point's maybe just a hair low. I can nudge that up a little bit or just drag that up, and that's really what I'm looking for, is just to see how smooth this is as a guide, and that it's generally the shape that I'm trying to create based on I'm using the temple really more for the fit I'm using the fit model rather more for the temple silhouette and shape and its overall curvature than anything else. And then I'm kind of relying on, let me hide the fit model. I'm then relying also on the front revised curves here as a guide to get me in the zone as well. So you can see that the red doesn't exactly follow them, but you can't be too married to what's been drawn in 2D for the most part, because it's just two-dimensional and it doesn't necessarily turn the corner or resolve as cleanly as you might think in 3D. So sometimes you have to deviate from what your guideline is, and that's really okay, because at the end of the day, it's a 3D product, not a 2D product, and it has to look good really from this angle more than it does from this angle. So I mean, you rarely are ever going to see a pair of glasses or any product orthographically. So that's the power of 3D. So in the next lesson, now that we've got this set up, it will help us create the front surface of the frame.